Hello, good evening, and welcome to A Moment with Dr. Grace. Let's talk life and legacy. A moment with Dr. Grace. It's always a joy and pleasure to be with you. And this afternoon, we are here once more to celebrate our Black History Month. And it's indeed a privilege to have my co host, Dr. Pearnel Bell, Chauna-Kaye Pottinger, and a special guest who will be introduced to you later on. And we'll be shedding light on this very intriguing topic. And what we will be answering are some critical questions about our legacy as it relates to our identity. And you would have seen the pause. What is the relationship between this roast breadfruit psychosis, post traumatic slave syndrome, and Anancyism? What is that relationship between these concepts and our identity as a Black nation? What and where and how have we lost our identity? What are the psychological implications for having lost or even regained found our identity? What are some of those psychological implications? And what are some practical nonviolence? Notice we are saying nonviolent ways for treating with these matter. It's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you this afternoon as we look at the topic reclaiming our identity, overcoming the rose breadfruit psychosis, Anancyism, and post traumatic slave syndrome. Dr. Bell and Chauna-Kaye, you are here with us, and the silence is just silence. It's a wonderful thing to be here this afternoon. And even before we ask our viewing audience to pause and share and ensure that we have the right people in the house, I just want to hear from you because I'm so excited to talk about this topic this afternoon for our Black History Month. Chauna-Kaye, Dr. Bell, what has been on your mind since we last had a link up?
Interestingly enough, I seem to be more excited about this topic because it's so new. I noticed that the word, when it comes down to COVID, being thrown around is novel. The idea, the whole concept of roast breadfruit psychosis is a novel idea for me. Meaning the terminology, I've never heard of it. But since I've delved into it for the past couple of days, it is quite an intriguing point of conversation. So I'm looking forward to that this week. Since we last talked, I think that was 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
I've discovered that I have some superwoman genes in my veins. Um, I was able to pull off some things for the past couple of weeks that I absolutely did not know that I had within me.
Mhm.
Um, but just because I've decided that I'm going to tackle my, if you will, my procrastination problem,
Okay.
that has been working very well for me since the last couple of weeks. But we'll talk about that some other time. Dr. Bell, over to you.
So, like Shauna K, really am looking forward to discussing this topic because for very long, people of color, Black people, have actually lost their identity. And
Mhm.
so, for us to explore this topic, look at this rose breadfruit psychosis and Anancyism, I am
Mhm.
really looking forward to our discussion. And so, great anticipation.
Yeah, you've got me really excited since we've been putting this thing together, and I honestly believe that this is something that is long overdue, and I'm really hoping that today we will have some great takeaways. So, this is Let's Talk Life and Legacy, a moment with Dr. Grace. And I know you have paused, you have shared, you have invited your friends to come into our space where we'll be having these conversations. So, as we move into the discussion, though, One of the things I have been looking at is how is it that we were created by one God from two people, Adam and Eve, and we have gone through these centuries, and then over this period of time we have all of these nations and people of color and varied colors having these kinds of challenges,
Mhm.
to the extent that some of us who are from the black race think that we are black on the outside and white on the inside. How is that ever possible? So some of these things we'll be answering. Shauna, when we look at this, I'd want for you to just bring in the conversation now, as we start the discussion segment.
Yeah, Doc. Before we jump into that, I just want to say a special good evening to those of you who are on here live right now. We appreciate your presence here. But we're going to ask you right now to just pause and just hit that share button, because more people need to be a part of this conversation. We're getting ready to start the topic. Dr. Bell is about to spit out some knowledge on us that you can't afford to miss, and you can't afford for your friends to miss. Listen, I see one person already trying to get ahead of the conversation. Tiasha James saying, is Anancyism a made-up terminology? Or listen, this is the age of Google, Dr. Bill and Dr. Kelly. You can't trick people these days, you know.
Well, Nancy, we trick you.
And that's the
Exactly.
trick. So I'm going to ask you to hit that share button, guys. Those of you who are on the live right now, go ahead and hit the share button so more people can come into the conversation. But, the mere fact that we're talking about reclaiming our identity, is very clear that something has been lost. So I'm very interested, to know, because we are all Christians on this platform right now, and we believe that a person's identity is rooted and grounded in Christ and in God, because he made us in his image. And so we find our identity or being in him. But I would really love to find out some more, Dr. Bell, if you will, as we consider the whole topic of reclaiming our identity. At what point did we even lose it? Can you speak to that some more?
So I want to begin though by speaking to the fact that we want here in the Caribbean to have a distinct Caribbean psychology. And so it's from that perspective that we want to look at identity. Our identities actually, and we're talking about African Caribbean peoples, our identity is born out of the fact that we were under slavery and then under colonization. And so we have to look back at identity and how identity was formed from that perspective. The perspective of the fact that we were actually looking from a Barbara Gludon poem that says that we were of pedigree coming from the African diaspora, and yet we came to the Caribbean under the colonialism and slavery, and lost that sense of pedigree, that sense of identity, that Africanness that we would have had because of enslavement. Remember, when we came to the Caribbean, we became property. And property, we were not seen even as people or as individuals. You started out talking that we were all created in God's image, but we weren't seen as people, we were seen as property. So just imagine a human race collectively being seen as property. And so that's where your identity could start. You're not human, you are something, yet you're breathing and living. So our identity definitely was born out of how we were enslaved and then colonized in that way.
So I see inspiration here, Coach Hillette. She has a question that I want to ask you as a follow-up to that question, Dr. Bell, because most people came here for the roast breadfruit tonight. Can you give them an idea as to what the roast breadfruit psychosis is all about?
Right. So there is a history to this rose breadfruit psychosis. This was coined by a psychiatrist, a Martinican psychiatrist, who termed the term roast breadfruit. All of us know the roast breadfruit, and we know the breadfruit, and we know when it is roasted, it is black on the outside and white on the inside. And so, yes, it is white on the inside. So what Fanon was actually seen in the UK was a plethora of mental health issues. And so it was thought of that Africans descendant did not have so much mental health issues because the brain wasn't so well developed. When he came back though to Martinique, what he saw was Black people acting white. And so when he saw that the outside we were Black, but inside we were taking on the characteristics and mannerism and attitudes of the Caucasian race, so that he coined the term rose breadfruit psychosis, because we are Black on the outside, white on the inside. And that in of itself created what we would call a dissonance, because you're thinking one thing and acting the other. And so that dissonance now was really what created the psychosis.
Interesting, quite intriguing. Can you give us an example, Dr. Bell? I don't want to dominate this part, but can you give us an example of some of the behaviors that we model, or even today that you see, that would appear white?
So first of all, the lack of acknowledgement that we are Black. You ever hear about everybody saying the brown girl in the ring, but they never say the Black girl in the ring? So we don't acknowledge our Blackness. That's number one, because it's always that brown girl in the ring. Because to say the Black girl would be acknowledging that exterior that ended up with self-esteem issues, because I'm not good enough. Again, I'm not good enough. So you will find that even our language, we ended up, because of slavery and colonialism, our native language of patois, where we know, out of the syncretism of the English and the African language, we came with our own distinct language, and that language for years and years and years was looked down on, as if we are not going to accept that as part of it. It's a bad language. It's a language that should not be formalized and spoken. So we want to look at that too. The fact that we have to straighten our hair, because we want those features that would look more Caucasian in identity. And so all of that was to cover our exterior, because we were not accepting what is Blackness.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it is a very
I see some people saying, is she pretty for a Black girl, which is true. Language like that, where you're pretty because you're but the pretty is in quotation, because Black people are pretty. So all of that came as part of our identity.
That's an excellent point that you make about the issues related to pretty for a Black girl, meaning that there's a stereotype where beauty is associated and affiliated with
whiteness.
Yes, with whiteness. Yeah.
So the straight nose and the small mouth that have these Caucasian features is the epitome of what beauty is. So if you're a Black with the distinctive mouth and forehead as a Black person, then you would be seen as or appreciated as a person.
And this thing could take us forever to continue such a conversation, for us to get an appreciation for this whole roast breadfruit psychosis. And I want to take this to a different level. Let's move in now to look at the post-traumatic slave syndrome. I even have to say it slowly because as a counselor, I've been trained and I understand the whole matter of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's what normally jumps up. But post-traumatic stress, slave syndrome, we look at the 16th centuries when slaves were being bought and being hunted like animals and being sold like commodity, and they were raped and abused and all different kinds of whatever color there is of the abuse, they would have suffered that. Could it be that those are some of the things that leave the psychological and the emotional scars that would have contributed to this development of this whole concept? And if so, tell us a little more about that, Dr. Bell.
So again, this is a concept coined by Joy DeGruy, an American psychologist who actually said this is part of the legacy that Black people inherited, so to speak, from the fact that they were enslaved. And this post-traumatic slave syndrome manifests itself in the new Americans. So it's not the people who have passed that they're saying even have this syndrome, but it is the current generation of individuals who now show this post-traumatic slave syndrome. They avoid places and people or activities and events that may remind them of the trauma that was passed down to them. Similar to post-traumatic stress, where if you go through a stressful or a traumatic situation, that you may you end up wanting to avoid places, is a similar way that you also avoid places that remind us of the traumatic experience. There's also difficulty concentrating, always feeling this jumpiness and easily angered. And she was specifically actually talking about African Americans who we saw slavery, we saw segregation that is ingrained in their system that resulted, according to DeGruy, with this post-traumatic slave syndrome. Many of them appear emotionally numb and have this, what they call a vacant self-esteem, which includes hopelessness, depression, general self-destructive outlook. And to be very honest, in my travels in my younger age to the US, I definitely saw African Americans different from us in many ways, who lacked that level of confidence. They were outspoken and upfront in their demeanor. And so I began to wonder what could, and when they saw us as Caribbean people putting ourselves out there, it seemed unusual. And so what the guru was actually saying is that this identity came out of slavery, and it is a trauma that is being manifested by African Americans and people also in the diaspora, which would be our Caribbean area, Latin America, and other countries that would be presenting with this syndrome.
That's very interesting, Dr. Bell. I'd be very intrigued and interested to find out, some of the resulting impacts of slavery, I believe, does have an effect on people as it relates to their level of confidence, especially when they continue to live in the very same space that their oppressors are, and their oppressors continue to hold on to the central axis of power, right? It's almost as if you continue to be re-traumatized, because when you look at the journey of the African American, as you say, the Caribbean folk I know for Jamaica in particular, we kicked the Europeans out of the country and said we will run this ourselves. And we have absolutely no idea what we're doing about running a country, but we ran them out of the country and we became the majority, right? And so we went to self-government much faster as a people. And so we would have possibly been able to overcome some of those challenges. But when you look at the journey and the struggle of the African American, who still until today is grappling with systemic racism, is still grappling with mass incarceration, is still grappling with police brutality. How do you reconcile that in terms of saying, hey, you guys don't have confidence? How do you reconcile that?
It cannot be reconciled if we don't eliminate or get rid of this level of discrimination and racism, because it is their identity. Have you ever actually hear African Americans talk, and when they do talk, it is, I have to warn my son, especially my son, when he goes out in the car, and if a policeman stops you, please go into that submissive role, because it is likely that you are going to die. So that's part of they are being identified as thugs. And I find it even mind-boggling that we can still have somebody as a Barack Obama who is still, identity is still wrapped up in discrimination, where a country of that nature can still discriminate against people of color and African people, African Americans, just the same. So it is wrapped up in that level of identity.
So and I guess I'm just trying to push a little bit further, because it's interesting to me that you say that. The challenge still remains if the people who are still inflicting the wounds are still the ones who hold on to power. How do you rise above that? How do you, as a people, recognize that and find a way to rise above it? And I'm sure Dr. Grace, with Joel coming on board, we'll be able to get into that later.
Right. And as we are going right now, it's obvious that each of these I would say subtopics of our general topic could take an entire evening for discourse. And I just want to move quickly into the other aspect. We grew up hearing about the Nancy story, and we've been tricked ourselves. And you have 3 bananas, and there are 4 of you, and so you give each person 1 banana and ask each person to give you half. Who? Well, at that low level, as it relates to the Anancyism. But how has this influenced not just our identity, but our behavior and the level of disregard for authority and other ways in which this has manifested itself? How has this affected us as a nation, as a people?
So I heard earlier somebody said they look up the term Anancyism, and if it is a made-up word, it is not a made-up word. It is part of our folklore that we have Anancyism, because Brother Anansi actually was imported to us from Africa, Ghana in particular. And so when the slaves came, that was their way of kind of feeling a sense of power. Because if you look at Brother Anansi is a spider, is a small insect, but yet it is representative of the Black person back in slavery, and then we got that legacy too. So Brother Anansi, he was a kind of dichotomous character. He was one that you love and you also hate, because he used his brain in a deceptive and trickery kind of way. But it was a way of, when telling these stories, to get some level of power. And the power was over the
to get back
white man. by means of using the brain to cut down. So you always have a brother tiger, lion, all of these great figures
And
that
it
little
always
spider
gives you
Anansi
money.
would trick and get them eating out of his hand, so to speak. So we that term Anancyism now is coined. When we look at our Jamaican population, we see a lot of deception and greed and and trickery and criminality that could represent Anancyism, but it's part of the identity because we used it back in slavery and after slavery to help to identify us as being a powerful people, survivors, resilience, and we could trick our way out of from the white man. So it gives a sense of a kind of a false power.
False for.
Very,
Yes.
very
I
interesting to
appreciate
share.
that. And right now, again, I am so excited about what's happening. I am sure that we need another 3 or 4 series to cover all of these. But Shauna, we are going to move forward in a different way now. We talk about our identity. And so often we think that our children are not affected by the way in which we operate, and we want to hear from a child's perspective. And guess who we have? We have Janae Edwards, and she's right there with her grandmother. And we want to ask her just to tell us, hi Janae, welcome to Let's Talk Life and Legacy. How are you?
I'm doing great, actually. I'm doing really
Wonderful.
great.
Wonderful. And you're looking great and smart. And so we have one question for you. Tell us, what has been your experience as you observe what's happening among your age group, your peers, as they, talk about or seek to appreciate or not appreciate the blackness and our identity? Talk to us about that.
Okay, so my experience as a child, I've seen a lot of kids don't like their culture. They think that their life is bad and they think that it is just not like others and they want to be like other people. But from what I see, from what's coming down at the bottom of my heart, is that being black is one of the most beautiful things I could have ever imagined to be. Blackness
Wow.
is just, it just makes me so happy. It just makes like my culture. I love it so much, and I don't understand why people don't love their culture. But I understand some people, but I just really want to express myself how I feel about it. And one thing that I love about being black is that I get to do a lot of things. I'm independent. I'm just really happy about my culture, and I love to be black. I would never change my skin color for anything. I just love
Oh,
to be.
Janae.
Wow, that is absolutely great. Would you share one word of encouragement to a child who may feel that they can't appreciate who they are? Just a word of encouragement.
So, if a child is watching this and you don't like your culture or you don't feel proud of being black, you, I think that you should like get to know your culture more. Ask someone who has like experience of their culture and get to know your culture better and start seeing yourself and like just being open with more black people so you can feel comfortable and feel proud about your culture.
Wow. Thank you so very much for sharing. You have brought some added inspiration to us this afternoon. And I hope in the
Watch them,
future
them
we
with
can
their
have
thumbs up.
so much. Brilliant, brilliant. We appreciate that. All right. Take care now, Janae. It's a pleasure having you. Now we want to pause just now to bring in our special guest. I know a lot of persons are here waiting, and if we could, we would do the drum roll for our Emmy winning Jamaican American. Well, actually, his Jamaican parent was born in the Bahamas and has lived in the US. So how do we put him in more a
Budge
Caribbean?
American.
And here we have a Yale doctoral student who has had several accomplishments. Joel, it's great having you here on Let's Talk Life and Legacy. And we understand that you compose a piece that has really impacted our culture in a very significant way. And it is something that you probably never anticipated getting out in public. So tell us a little bit about what that is and what really motivated you and how it fits into the context of our conversation this afternoon.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation. I am coming to you right now from New Haven, Connecticut. I'm a doctoral student at Yale. And the first piece really that I got published is a piece called Seven Last Words of the Unarmed. I wrote it in the winter in between 2014, 2015. And it was a personal, task I set for myself to ruminate upon the grief and the pain and the anger that I felt in the wake of a string of deaths of Black men, in particular, at the hands of authority figures here in the United States. And I decided to write a piece about it. As a choral conductor, as a choral musician, I turned obviously to words and music and decided to set the last words of unarmed Black men that were killed by police. I was inspired by another artist, an Iranian-American journalist by the name of Shirin Bargi, who had a pictogram series on Twitter that paired the last words of unarmed Black men with a simple image. And so I decided to make a musical version of that.
Wow.
I used the last words of Eric Garner, I Can't Breathe, Oscar Grant, He Shot Me, Trayvon Martin, What Are You Following Me For? And I used the liturgy of the last words of Christ as my template. For me, reading the last words of Christ throughout all of the Gospels focuses on the humanity of Christ. He says things like, I'm thirsty, which I've said, which we've all said. And I felt a strong impulse to focus on the humanity of these men. After they were killed in 2014 and before, many people tried to justify their deaths in an effort to, they tried to say that they were thugs or they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I wanted to sort of reclaim their humanity and by proxy my own, and so this piece was born out of that.
That's powerful, and I just want to say that my girls and I, we played that thing full blast in our living room, and it was just something to just listen to the power that came through those sound waves as you listen to these guys, their last words crying out to say, you shot me, those things. I mean, it was quite powerful. I have to say that you've shattered a lot of stereotypes, Joel, when it comes on to Black excellence and all of those things. I think you rank right up there, because usually when you associate music, especially for our race, it's never within the realm of the classical genre. And I think you've done that masterfully, Joel. But, I want to talk to you about something, and it's kind of controversial because this is something I hear being thrown around a lot. On the issue of social justice, you've made your mark in this. What about those individuals who believe that the cause for social justice is not one that's to be taken on by a Christian? Many will use Christ as the example that when he came here, his people faced a lot of oppression under the Roman Empire, but he never went up against those government. He never went up against those systems. What would you say to somebody who would say it is no business for a Christian to get involved in the work of social justice?
I would remind them of the the Samaritan woman at the well. I
Mhm.
would remind them that Jesus went out of his way to go towards a neighborhood that he was not welcome, uh, that he was a part of, that the Samaritan woman was hated by his disciples. There was enmity between his people and those people, and yet he decided to talk to her. I would point that person to uh, the prostitute, the one he drew in the sand and said, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." I see a Jesus who goes towards those who are the lowest rungs of society and lifting them up in the name of his Father. And so I don't see how one could look at the Jesus that I know and say that he is not about justice for the downtrodden and social justice, which is exactly that. Sure, he didn't defeat the Roman Empire, uh, but he died for all, and for that reason,
Mhm.
we seek justice for all, and that's essentially what social justice is to me, at least. Um, I think I also want to address what you said earlier about my position in classical music.
Mhm.
In light of the context of this conversation, I feel that there has always been Black excellence in music. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, Jamaica is a shining example of that.
Mhm.
Sharing our music, it's known throughout the entire world. Uh, the fact that I have chosen to focus on in this classical space, um, there is a little bit of, uh, well, I'm aware that it is a very white space, but I take full advantage of the opportunity to have a room of rapt listeners who are mostly white. It's one of the only times they will actually listen to what I have to say. Uh, and it's not a I want to make sure that people understand that classical music is just that. It is primarily by design exclusive to those who are not white and male. You rarely see uh, a woman conductor. Women composers are still trying to
Mhm.
find their way. It's been purposefully exclusive, um, and so me just trying to have my voice be heard in that space is strategic.
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
yeah, because I could write something in various genres, but the people who I want to hear it won't listen. So
Yeah.
when I start speaking your language, now you have to listen.
Yes. And what I want to share is that I really appreciate that because when I think there are at least four different choirs. I know there are more, but at least four different choirs that would have performed their song professionally. And when I look at the compilation, the group, and in terms of Caucasian, as you had a good blend and a good mix, and you could see them at rapt attention. And just for the benefit of those who are here, when you're finished, you must watch this. But I hope I did justice to this, Joel. I pulled out the words and I just want them to get a feel of it.
Okay.
Shauna, yes, let's see.
What
Hmm?
time?
Okay. I,
It's
I,
sort of, I don't know if for anybody else it was in and out. I wasn't really hearing all of it,
yeah,
but
the internet seemed to have been affected. The internet seemed to have affected it, but just the emotions that were expressed. One of the things I appreciated when you were introducing one of the choirs, you said, listen, I'm putting in my words, listen beyond the emotions that will come out of this, because the truth of the matter is when I started listening, I hurt, I pained, but then I got to the point where I could appreciate the essence of what was happening. You're not reliving their story. You are retelling the story so that we can have an appreciation of who we are and how we can treat with these challenges in a non-violent way and get to the core of the matter. I hope I summarized it. I summarized it well. I'd like for you to expand a little bit though on something I heard in one of your introduction in saying that you want to be able to talk to your future self, your future children, and your parents' future grandchildren so that their great grandchildren would not have to have this conversation. What is that about?
Well, um, I I came to the U.S. when I was 10, and quickly my whole family had to learn what it means to be Black in the United States. And a part of that education um, was between my parents and I. We had to sit down and talk. When I started driving for the first time, just being aware that it's more deadly for me than it is for the average white American. That there are some things that I just have to be aware of. Not just driving, simply walking. um, Hearing someone call me the N word for no reason for the first time is etched in my memory. And so you just know that there is a latent and sometimes very explicit hostility towards Black people. And
Mhm,
I know it pained my parents to be able to have that conversation with me, and I know that it will be painful for me as well with my future children. But I said that intro in the hopes that you know this piece itself, music itself, is not going to change the world, but people are.
mhm,
And I know the power of music to transform an individual. I am a musician because I have been transformed by music. And I know that that effect is what I'm hoping will happen on the listener. And I'm hoping that they will be transformed to help them create a society in which
mhm,
at least my grandchildren won't have to have that conversation with my great grandchildren.
mhm.
Um, I hope that this conversation just stops um, if Jesus continues to tarry. But it in the event that it's you know generations go on, I hope that this scourge stops. So that's a little bit of context for that particular intro.
Joel, I absolutely love stories. I don't know if you have any stories or any experiences of anyone or in particular that you would want to share with our viewing audience in terms of the impact that this song has had. I know for sure you definitely got Emmy awards for this piece. So clearly it's been acknowledged, and that in and of itself is a success story. But do you have any other inspirational stories or experiences that you want to share as a result of putting this piece out there and the difference that that has made?
Yes, I've had a lot of great feedback, some negative feedback, but most of it has been positive. But for me, the most transformational experience was sitting next to Amadou Diallo's mom. Amadou Diallo was shot at 41 times by plainclothes police officers. His last words that I said in the piece were actually in a voicemail to his mom. He had been washing dishes in New York trying to pursue a degree in computer science. And he didn't have enough money. His mom was still back in Guinea in Africa, and he had finally saved up enough money. And his last words on the voicemail were, "Mom, I'm going to college." Um, Unfortunately, people thought that he matched a description of a serial rapist in that neighborhood, and these plainclothes police officers shot at him when he was trying to reach for his wallet. I got to meet his mom, the mom who had that voicemail, Katia Diallo. She was present at the premiere of the orchestrated version. That version that we listened to was the original chamber version, but I was commissioned to expand it and use the full orchestral palette. And at that premiere in 2017, I got to sit next to her, and we held hands and cried the entire piece. After she heard her son's last words sung, she leaned over into my ear and said, "I've never heard someone capture my son's spirit so well." And then I bawled even more. That was transformational for me. But other people who have engaged with the piece, who have sung the piece, have talked about conversations that they've had with their community, Black people saying that, thank you for saying something out loud, like expressing it in a way that words were not able to express. I feel that the sentiments that I'm expressing in this piece are shared among a lot of Black people in this country, and there is a healing that happens when you recognize that this pent-up feeling that you have within you is also outside of you, that you are not alone in this feeling.
Yes.
And there's and I also like, Dr. Grace, that you pointed out the varied races in interacting with this piece. For me, as the composer of the piece, it feels as if I'm in couples therapy, where I have stated my truth. This is the pain that I carry, and seeing them perform is the other person, the other partner in the couple,
Wow.
saying, "I hear you." I'm reflecting it back at you, and when I see that, that starts my healing process. So it's been great for me as a composer to see people who are not Black sing these words and connect with my struggle. Only then I feel that can we actually transform our society, when we all recognize this is an issue that affects all of us.
Excellent.
Powerful. What a legacy. What a legacy.
Doesn't
We
get
are
much better
so
than this.
grateful. We are so grateful to have had you here. And for all of us, the final question before we move into the speak up segment, which we are really hoping that the folks would have put in their questions already or their thoughts. What are some practical ways in which we can reclaim our identity? Dr. Bell, Joel, Chauna, at least one from each of you. Practical way, other than what was mentioned already, because I think, Joel, you've done a fantastic job
Masterful.
with using music in that way. One other. Dr. Bell, practical ways. You're muted.
One of the things that we want to do is to embrace the language that we have coined for ourselves, which is in Jamaica, our dialect, the patois. We want to embrace that. We want to make it a formal language, so that we are not looking down, because that forms part of who we are. It's part of our identity. It's not a language that should be locked away somewhere. It's a language that should be spoken, and it should be part of our Africanness. So I believe that we want to reclaim that. I know right now we have a Creole Bible, and I am telling you, I have become very versed in it because I have been using it. And even as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, we are now preaching in patois.
It's awesome.
All our sermons are done in patois, comments in patois, and I'm part of that group. So we are reclaiming our identity, even in the form of language that we speak.
Thank you for sharing. Go ahead, Chauna.
For me personally, to be honest with you, I don't think there's any greater privilege that we have to impact the legacy and impact the next generation than through positive parenting of our young Black children, whether that be young Black girls or young Black boys, raise them up to recognize, that they're made in the image of a God who is so big and so vast. And they have absolutely nothing to be ashamed or afraid of when it comes down to their bodies. And so that's where I make a difference every single day when I get up. I remind my children of how beautiful they are, except when they're getting on my nerves. But I tend to instill that value and that sense of confidence in my children. As I've said it over and over again, and I will continue to say it. I don't necessarily emphasize on my children being the top of their class as much as I emphasize on them being the leader of their class. Whichever space you're in, know that you have every right to be there. Know that you can rest assured and be confident that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Remove the surface from it. Don't just focus on the physical aspects of your being, but focus on you being a whole beautiful person. And that is where I'm making the difference every single day as much as I can. And I continue to use my voice to mentor other people to do the same.
Thank you, Joel.
For me, one of the most powerful things that can form identity is narrative. We're seeing that a lot of that here in the US right now, where there are conflicting narratives about United States identity. Black people have a specific narrative that focuses on the struggles that we have gone through, and white people tend to diminish and ignore that. So a part of that, though, that's just the past part of the narrative. I think it's sort of re-engaging with our history, knowing that it wasn't just slavery, but that there were kings and queens before. That there is royalty in our legacy, and also knowing in our present moment that we have the ability to shape the narrative of the future. What does that future look like? Thinking of how we can connect our past to our present to our future, I think is the key to reclaiming this identity.
Thank you. I appreciate your sharing. And the thing that stands out most for me, while I was preparing over the past couple weeks, the two weeks in preparation for this, I've been reading a lot of Black history and other things just to get myself connected a little more. And Maya Angelou made a statement that I really like. She said, "Love heals." And when I thought about that, looking at our origin coming from a God of love, a God of compassion, I believe that if we were to use that model of how Christ display love towards us despite what we are, who we are, where we have been, and if we can understand that we are not our past, and that we have this identity in God, and if we have a relationship with Him, then we become that person who will always love others as we love ourselves. And with that, we will treat others as we would like to be treated. And that's the kind of legacy, if I were to put it that way, that I'd want to pass on and hope that each of us would use as we seek to reclaiming our identity. So thank you all for sharing. It's our Speak Up moment, and we are going to have some of our persons from the audience sharing with us via the chat. And Shauna, you may lead out with this.
Jenny wanted to say something about the legacy.
Okay, we appreciate that. Come on, Jenny, our special guest. And Jenny.
Okay, so at my school, well, coming up this Friday, we're gonna have a Jamaica Day at our school, and we are like going to dress up in our Jamaican culture, and a really fun thing what my teacher planned for us to do is to talk, like say some sentences in patois, just for like really fun to just bring up the culture. And I really like how I really like that, because it really like reclaims our culture. And at JCDC, my school is always saying patois poems. They're dancing to Jamaican music, and it's really nice. And I really just love it, and it makes me really happy. And I think that yeah, that's what that
Excellent. Thank you. I see we have great future ahead of us with our young Janae. We appreciate you sharing that. We are really out of time, but I want to hear from our audience just in case there's somebody with a burning question or suggestion for our speak up segment. Shauna, you may go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted us to reiterate because I don't think we spend enough time on the Anancyism piece of the
Mhm.
discussion. I hope we will be able to get back to that piece in terms of that being embedded in the Jamaican culture and how that currently impacts our ability to advance.
I
So I
can
would-
tell you this, Shauna. It is so important that I honestly believe that we should have an entire series on the Anancyism. It is such a critical thing. Going back to it tonight, it's going to take us into another level, and we would have to have another 45 minutes to 1 hour. No, to treat with it because there was an article some time ago in the newspaper, that our local newspaper, that was talking about the Anancyism and how it is creating basically havoc for our nation. And there is good and bad in the Anancyism concept, and I think we should do that. But right now, we just have time to take some of the comments from our audience and to have Joel share with us afterwards, how persons could reach him to follow his work, because we believe it is so good, so critical that we have this legacy being followed and being promoted in a significant way.
Excellent. So we have a question here from Tiasha James. I'm not sure which of the panelists will answer this one, but he says, how do we get our white friends to care enough to do what they can to help out the cause? That's the first part of the question. And have you observed any evidences of how the PTSD African Americans experience in turn affect whites? So there are two questions in one, wrapped into
Yeah.
one, Joel.
I have tired of trying to have people care about my plight.
Mhm.
I no longer think it's my responsibility to train people in basic empathy.
Mhm.
So I tend to use my emotional energy towards creating the future that I want to see for my family and future family. Um, I don't think that the post-traumatic slave syndrome or PTSD that African Americans experience really does affect whites in direct ways. Um, the whole system is built upon our subjugation, and in order to actually have revolution, it would require people to give up power. This whole thing is about power. And whiteness is not necessarily tied to nation or kin. It's a part of, as Tressie McMillan Cottom, the wonderful sociologist here in the United States, she calls it the primordial ooze of capitalism. It's really rooted in power.
Yeah.
Italians came to this country and said that they were called white N-words when they first arrived, but then they achieved whiteness. The same thing for the Irish. They came here and then they weren't white. They were equal to black people, and then they achieved whiteness. So whiteness is flexible, and blackness has to be sort of in a
Excluded.
box. Yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
it's not really direct. There's so much to say about this, but
It's a lot.
I would
yeah, I'll
like
stop
to
now.
I'd like to weigh in on that, the last part of the post-traumatic stress for whites. I actually lecture out of Canada, a course called Multicultural Counseling. And there's always the question of white privilege coming up in that discussion. And it's always a kind of bragging. But when you ask the question, where did white privilege come from? There's a lot of avoidance. There's a kind of shifting away, looking away from you, not wanting to address the question, because white privilege comes from oppression. It comes from subjugation. It comes from putting down a race. And it comes from atrocities right across. When we look in Canada at the Native Canadians and what happened when they were displaced from in and placed in residential schools, taken away from their parents, they cannot look up to and acknowledge. And so what happens is that they too experience a kind of trauma when they're faced with those atrocities that they meted out to other races, people of color, Black people. And so I believe in many respects that they are unable to face up many times, as they mention privilege. They're unable to face up to the kind of how they obtained that privilege. It becomes traumatizing for them when they're faced with those realities. Many of them, not everybody, but I see it in that way.
All right. I just want to add something. I honestly don't know where and how it fits in, but listen to this. I worked in Benton Harbor area schools. That's in Michigan. That's the worst inner city area in the entire United States. And one of the things that challenged me was that the children in the primary schools, they were adamant on not doing their schoolwork and not getting ahead, because the entire time they're there thinking, why am I going to do this when I'm not going to live beyond age 12 or 13? So they were cultured to think that they were the less than and they were the ones that will be taken out at an early age. I thought it came back to me forcefully as we are talking about this whole matter of the post-traumatic slave syndrome. I honestly believe that the only way we are going to change what's happening is from an inside out. We've got to empower ourselves and other individuals to become, rather than just trying to live up to. Anybody can do anything, but when you are it, you are just it. But you've got to know it from the inside to be convinced that you are more than just the color of your skin, and you have the potential to have the best life ever.
So we have one other question from our viewing audience. It says, are there notable effects of slavery? And that's post-traumatic. And this is somewhat similar to the question that was asked earlier, seen today in Jamaicans in particular.
I think for Jamaicans, it is said that we had the worst slaves and we also had the worst colonial masters. And so our rebelliousness is wrapped up in resilience and that same Anancyism, where we had to find ways to, even if it is in a defense mechanism way, a kind of projection. In that way, we were able to, I think, survive through our resilience. And after a while, even though slavery was abolished and colonialism came, Black people became the dominant race. And so I don't think that we are so ingrained in this post-traumatic slave syndrome. But for Americans, as you had said earlier, Chauna-Kaye, it was so pervasive, persistent. Up to now, with African Americans have to be defending themselves. So it has never stopped. So it's a re-traumatization, unlike us here in the Caribbean, where we have had some time to heal in some way.
Thank you.
I think some of the things that you had mentioned at the very beginning with the roast breadfruit psychosis probably connect to this question a little bit more in terms of not necessarily valuing our blackness and sort of seeing whiteness as a standard to which we should aspire. That seems to be one of the effects that I could find common between Jamaicans and African Americans, because it's still something that we're struggling with, that we still, you know, denigrate ourselves rather than look at ourselves as the standard to be reached.
And Joel, that's true. And I think part of this discussion, we have to talk about the collective unconscious. Because Chauna-Kaye, you said to Joel, you're in this genre of music. To me, that would, if it was coming from someone else, it could be seen as a microaggression. Seriously, it could be seen as a microaggression because Black people were not in classical music because they were barred out of it. It's not because we were everything prior to, but it's because there were barriers and blockage. So it's not that we didn't have or didn't know how.
Yeah, but
those
I want
opportunities weren't there.
Yeah,
no, I'm not attacking you. I'm just looking at how
no.
Our identity is also mixed up into language, of coaching certain language, so that we kind of even in a way continue to put ourselves in a box.
Yes, and also there's another positive side to it where you're acknowledging someone who goes against the grain and goes against the norms that society is feeding to them. And I think definitely when that happens, you have to underscore it, highlight it, and celebrate it. And that's specifically what I was doing, Joel. We celebrate.
I understand. No worries. There's actually a comment by Melly McD who's commenting on being mixed race and not actually finding a place to fit in. And that's something I strangely connect to, although I am definitely Black and not mixed race. But being born in the Bahamas, but by Jamaican parents, I never really felt Bahamian. I don't feel American, even though 2/3 of my life is spent here. I'm not Jamaican enough to be Jamaican. If I were to try and haggle in a market, I would definitely be told to pay way more than I should. But so for that reason, I feel like I'm on the outside. But there's something about being on the margins of cultures to which you belong that allow you to bear witness to what is in that culture. And so there's something powerful about being on the margin. You get to bear witness. You get to have a specific vantage point in which you can comment and provide healing, perhaps, for those who are definitely deep within the culture. So I encourage Melly to find comfort in being on the outside sometimes.
Boy, Joel, I don't know if it is you, but we are so comfortable that we are not looking at the time anymore. I really want you to speak to some of the work you're engaged in. I know there is something coming up. There's going to be, this sunny day?
This snowy day. Yes, I have an opera that's... Yeah, I have an opera that's premiering this December in Houston Grand Opera. And it's based on a children's book written by a Jewish author, but it's the first children's book in the United States to feature a Black child protagonist. And I adapted that into an opera in the past year. It was supposed to premiere this past December, but COVID. And so it's been moved to this coming December. And I'm really excited about it. And if you want to follow my work, I'm working on a website right now, but for now you can go to 7lastwords.org and you can get more information about the piece that I talked about earlier. And when my website comes out, there will be a link on that website. So 7lastwords.org, and you can find me on Facebook if you'd like.
Okay. We are so grateful for having you here this afternoon, and it's been our absolute pleasure. I'm going to ask each of you, Chauna, Dr. Bell, and Joel, just to share one statement of empowerment to our audience as we wrap up this very interesting and intriguing conversation.
I want to end with the poem from Barbara Gludon.
Okay, I'll let you go last then. Shauna and Joel, what's your word of empowerment?
My word for of empowerment is rise up, ye mighty people, and shine for Jesus. You know, these are the words of you mighty race. This is the word of one of my favorite national heroes, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. I really and truly believe that there is a superpower that's at work in the human race called the Black race. Um, Having gone through what we've gone through, yet we're still standing and we're strong as ever. I still believe that once we tap into that greatness that God has endowed us with, that the possibilities are endless. So we just need to continue to allow our identity to be rooted and grounded in Christ so that he can transform us and make us into the true leaders and kings and queens that we were born to be.
Amen.
I don't have any words, so I'm going to steal from James Baldwin. He said at a speech in 1987, "We are living in a world in which everybody and everything is interdependent. It is not white, this world. It is not black either. The future of this world depends on everyone in this room. And that future depends on to what extent and by what means we liberate ourselves from a vocabulary which now cannot bear the weight of reality."
Mm,
Powerful.
love
Thank
it.
you. Dr. Bell.
So this is a poem from Barbara Gludon in her pantomime Mandea. My ancestor them was king and queen, and them did come from far way across the sea. But somebody thief them pedigree. Yes, thief them pedigree. Them put them in a chain, work them very hard. Try to broke them down, try to take away them yard. Them rob them of them name and them history. Try to make them shame, say them nervous free. But them spirit strong, strong subtle. Them fight for them freedom. Them fight like hell. So let us continue to fight. Power, power, power.
Amen. That power that is within us, and that's
I
how.
see Joy laughing.
Yes,
I love
Joel,
it.
it's
I
been
love
good.
it. I love
It's
it
been
too.
good. It's been good. It's been a wonderful evening, and this is how we end our Let's Talk Life and Legacy with Dr. Grace. I I am so pleased and I would say overwhelmed. You didn't see it, but the tears came and I held them back. It's tears of agony, but more so tears of joy to know that we have a cohort of persons who are armed with the right tools to transform the culture and to ensure that we live the quality life that we were intended. May we own the space and may we go forth in ensuring that we anchor ourselves and find our identity in Christ. This evening, we looked at the topic reclaiming our identity, overcoming roast breadfruit psychosis, Anancyism, and post traumatic slave syndrome. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being a great audience. Thank God for his leading. Thanks, Shauna. Thanks, Dr. Bell. Thanks, Joel. And we all say ta-ta
ta-ta.
Ta-ta.
until next time. God
Bye.
bless you.